an independent voice.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right about that. He just doesn't give a fuck, and we definitely need more people like that. But so transitioning a little bit to the topic of Epstein and Trump and Israel, like we mentioned that like Israel, or not Israel, but the Epstein thing has been one of the most bipartisan stories of my lifetime because it affects both sides of the political spectrum. But everything that's going on right now with the Israel lobby becoming more and more in the public light, and how our politicians are being paid off by Israel, and now you have the people in the government saying that we attacked Iran because Israel did it first. And it seems like if you are a foreign country that is subverting another country, you want to at least be a little bit discreet about it, right? You don't want to be so overt. And it feels to me like they're intentionally being overt about this and intentionally trying to stir up more controversy over the Israeli influence in the U.S.
Yeah, but I don't think they're doing it out of miscalculation, but rather panic and necessity. It's hard to overstate for people who only started paying attention to Israel in a really intense and passionate way since, say, October 7th, how different of a world we live in when it comes to the ability to talk about this than basically every era before this. You have generations, basically since the creation of Israel. You can go back and listen to Harry Truman when the United States was the first country to recognize Israel, when Zionism was still very controversial as a new ideology. It didn't even exist until the early 20th century, basically. We talk about it now like Zionism is a religion, nobody can question it, but Zionism is a very new religion. There are a lot of religious Jews who think it's heresy, but they're outnumbered. I've interviewed them on my show. If you probably the worst accusation that you could stand accused of being guilty of in public life was anti-Semitism. People were petrified of it. I mean, you could withstand being called a racist more easily or any other, but anti-Semitism, being an anti-Semite, that was career destruction. And it's not hard to understand why. There are a lot of, very powerful Jewish people. This is just reality. I know like people want you not to say it, but in banking, in Hollywood, in media, in politics, in education, in universities. And so there was a lot of power that was packed into that accusation. And I remember one of the first times I ever really confronted this as like someone who was, writing about politics and doing journalism, it was like 2006. Hillary Clinton was running for the Senate in New York. And this was before like the Hillary Clinton that we now know, like the super mega establishment Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State, who advocated wars. This is like the Hillary Clinton who people still thought was kind of like the left-wing Hillary Clinton as she was depicted in the 90s when her husband was president, going back to her Vietnam years when she was a protester, feminist. And when she was running for the Senate in New York, she started taking these very hardline positions, including about Iran. This is like in the midst of the Iraq War. She voted for the Iraq War. She was very hawkish on Iran. And she had this finance guy for her campaign named Hank Scheinkauf. And they had this neoconservative Jewish newspaper called the New York Sun. I think it's now defunct, but at the time it was a big neocon journal. And they asked him like, hey, what gives? Why is Hillary Clinton so hawkish now? Like she seems like she's almost like in the center, even on the right. And he said, look, the reality is in New York politics is that Jewish donors are the ATM of New York politics, and you cannot succeed in New York politics unless you become fanatically pro-Israel. And I wrote about this. This is a Jewish finance director of Hillary Clinton saying this. I'm Jewish. I was writing about it because he actually said it. And I remember it was like the first time I really got attacked, like in a serious orchestrated way. Yeah, 2006.
Wow.
It was like, you're an anti-Semite. This is a trope that Jews control everything, that they have all the money that they use. I was like, no, but I'm not the one saying it. I'm just reporting. Like, this is the reality of what this guy is saying to a neocon Jewish newspaper, the New York Sun. And then it was that year that John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, the professors at Harvard and the University of Chicago, wrote an essay in that they couldn't get published in the United States. So they published it in the London Review of Books called The Israel Lobby, and then they turned it into a book in 2007, which was the first real mainstream scholarly attempt to drag the Israel lobby out into the light. Because as you said, they had been hiding in the kind of, operating in the shadows, the way most lobbies prefer to. Not just them, but most lobbies. And I was shocked by just how these like very well respected, faculty members at our leading institutions, among the best, most regarded international relations scholars in the world, just instantly overnight got turned into Jew-hating bigots, anti-Semites. And that was when I realized, wow, this is something you can't talk about. Just my personality is okay. Well, then I'm going to talk about it as much as possible. So all I can tell you is this is how they operated for so long. They were in the shadows and they were incredibly effective. I would be screaming about this like we would hear the Republican and Democrats can't agree on anything. And then you would get some AIPAC resolution that they would put before Congress, when Israel was bombing Gaza in 2014, for example. Not as much as they did in 2023, but it was a serious bombing campaign. And they had some resolution AIPAC wanted put before the Senate and the House. And it passed like the Senate 90-2 saying we are on Israel's side. We side with Israel. We stand with Israel. And the House was like 431-6. Wow. And it's like you don't see bipartisan consensus on any issue other than this very controversial country. And so the power is so obvious, but it operated in the shadows.
Yes.
What happened was the combination of what they did in Gaza and just the absolute like moral atrocity of it, and the fact that we now have independent media. So, if this had happened 10 years ago, no one would have seen it. Now you have, people in Gaza with their own phones uploading every day.
Right.
And you have, people who aren't afraid to show this. And you have all these people consuming it on TikTok and everywhere else. And the polls just started immediately collapsing in the United States. And you had major figures like Tucker, who never talked about Israel before October 7th. I was on his show 1,000 times before October 7th on his Fox show. Never once went there to talk about Israel, never asked me to talk about that. But a lot of people were like, I can't avoid what I'm seeing. This is, and it wasn't just what Israel was doing. It was the fact that the United States was paying for it, financing it all, arming it, diplomatically and militarily protecting it. We were completely a party to the war. And young people first, and then lots of other people started finally seeing the truth. And that's what finally dragged the Israel lobby out into the open, was that they couldn't afford any longer to kind of have this subtle operation. They had to really like go after people you see what they're trying to do to Tucker. I think the most understated story of the last year is the fact that you have this app, TikTok, which was used voluntarily by a third of the American population, talking about tens of millions of people, and was easily the most popular for American young people. And it was really one of the apps, the only social media platforms that the government couldn't completely control the way they did with Google and Facebook, Meta, and the rest, because they're so dependent on the American government. They were allowing a lot more free speech on the things the American government cares about, like Israel, which is why there was, and a lot of people have this misperception that they decided to ban TikTok because of China. It was in 2020 when Trump said, let's ban TikTok because of China. It went nowhere. No one took it seriously. It didn't get anywhere near the vote. It lingered for years. It was only after October 7th, and the ADL in January 2024 says, we have a big TikTok problem. We need to ban TikTok. And then suddenly the Democrats get on board with it. The Biden administration gets behind it. They banned a social media app in the United States, the thing we accuse China of doing, or Iran, or Russia, or whatever, and then they force its sale to Larry Ellison, the single largest donor in history, private donor to the IDF, to the Friends of the IDF. He puts an IDF soldier in charge of content moderation. It's all done right out in the open. And it's, and then he buys CBS News and puts Barry Weiss in charge. Like the panic is so visible now. And that's why, they never wanted that. They never wanted it to be so obvious that you and I are able to talk about this and everyone just nods their head and understands what we're saying. This was, if you said this 5 years ago, even if you had me on my show and we talked about this, and you talked about the Epstein class and the Rothschilds and AIPAC, you would be destroyed.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
But now the cat is out of the bag and it's never going back in.
Not only would you be destroyed, but on social media apps like YouTube, your content would be completely invisible to people.
Yeah, or banned or suppressed or whatever.
Some level of suppression that they were doing like all the time when Biden was president.